The conference room at Dad's office had never felt smaller. Miranda sat at the head of the table like she owned the place, her perfectly manicured nails drumming against the mahogany surface. Mom perched beside her, that familiar look of disappointment etched across her face as she glanced at me. Dad stood by the window, arms crossed, looking every bit the successful real estate developer he'd been for 30 years. And then there was me, the daughter who'd somehow managed to disappoint them all. "Let's get this over with," Miranda said, pulling out a stack of papers. "Sarah, we've all seen the writing on the wall. Your little payment processing company has been hemorrhaging money for 3 years now. It's time to face reality." I took a sip of my coffee, saying nothing. The ceramic mug was warm against my palms, grounding me. "Hemorrhaging is such a strong word," Mom chimed in, though her tone suggested she agreed completely. "But sweetie, you have to admit you're in over your head. This was always going to be too complicated for you." 3 years ago, I'd started secure flow payment systems in a rented office space barely larger than a storage closet. While my family built strip malls and apartment complexes, I'd been fascinated by the invisible infrastructure of money, how it moved, how it was tracked, how it could be protected. They'd called it a phase. Said I was wasting my MIT degree on computer stuff, when I could have joined the family business. "The numbers don't lie," Dad finally spoke, turning from the window. "I've looked at your reports, Sarah. You're barely covering operational costs. No significant client acquisitions in 18 months. Your biggest contract is with what? A chain of dry cleaners." 3 chains actually, I corrected quietly. Dry cleaners, car washes, and small medical practices. Miranda laughed, a sharp sound that cut through the room. "Oh, 3 whole chains. How impressive." Meanwhile, I've been expanding Dad's business into commercial development across 5 states. "But sure, your dry cleaner clients are definitely comparable." I set down my coffee cup and folded my hands in my lap. The presentation folder Miranda had prepared sat unopened in front of me. I already knew what was inside. A buyout offer, probably insultingly low, with terms that would effectively erase my company from existence. "Sarah, honey, this isn't an attack," Mom said in that overly gentle voice she used when she was about to say something cruel. "We're family. We want to help you. Miranda has generously offered to take over Secure Flow, absorb it into the family holdings. You'd get a small payout, maybe a consulting position if you wanted." "I'd have to think about the consulting part," Miranda interrupted, examining her nails. "We'd need to restructure everything. Your systems are so outdated, Sarah. I mean, who even uses that kind of encryption architecture anymore?" My jaw tightened slightly, but I kept my expression neutral. Miranda had a business degree from a state school and had learned everything she knew about commerce from Dad. She couldn't tell you the difference between SHA-256 and AS encryption if her life depended on it. "The offer is generous," Dad continued. $200,000 for full ownership transfer. That's more than fair given the company's current valuation." I almost laughed. 200,000. My operating budget for security infrastructure alone was 3 times that annually. But they didn't know that. They'd never asked about the details. They saw the modest office, the small public client list, the lack of flashy marketing, and assumed failure. "You've been at this for 3 years, sis." Miranda leaned forward, her voice dripping with false sympathy. 3 years of struggling, of barely keeping your head above water. Don't you want to finally relax? Maybe travel? Find a nice guy to settle down with? You're 32. The clock's ticking on more than just your business. Mom nodded enthusiastically. Miranda's right. You could focus on your personal life for once. Your cousin Jennifer is pregnant with her 3rd, you know. Don't you want that kind of happiness? The implication hung heavy in the air. Successful women got married and had children. Unsuccessful women built failing tech companies and stayed single. "I need you to understand something." Dad walked over to the table, placing both hands on the surface as he leaned toward me. "This isn't a negotiation, Sarah. I've been subsidizing your office rent for the past year. Did you think I didn't know? The building owner is a friend. He told me you've been late on payments 6 times. My stomach tightened. I had been late on payments, because I'd been diverting every available dollar into R&D, into building systems they couldn't even begin to comprehend. The office rent was always paid eventually, but the delays had apparently been noted and reported. So here's what's going to happen." Dad straightened up. "You're going to sign Miranda's papers today. Transfer ownership cleanly. Or I pull my support entirely, and you can explain to your landlord why next month's rent isn't coming at all. Dad, don't be so harsh, Miranda said, though her smile suggested she was enjoying every second of this. Sarah just needs time to process. This is her baby after all. Even if it's a failure, there's emotional attachment. There's no time for processing, Mom interjected. We have the family gala next weekend. The Hendersons will be there and their son Marcus just made partner at his law firm. It would be so much better if we could introduce Sarah as a consultant for the family business rather than a failed entrepreneur. I looked at each of them in turn. Miranda practically vibrating with anticipation. Mom already planning how to spin this to her social circle. Dad disappointed as always, ready to absorb another one of my mistakes into the family empire. Can I at least review the papers? I asked quietly. Miranda's smile widened. Of course. Take your time. We have all afternoon. She slid the folder across the table. I opened it slowly, scanning the contents. Asset transfer agreement. Non-compete clause preventing me from starting another payment processing company for 5 years. A consulting contract at $40,000 a year, barely enough to cover a modest apartment in this city. The non-compete is standard, Miranda explained, her tone condescending. We can't have you running off to start another failing venture that might compete with our newly acquired assets. It's just business, sis. I turned the pages, my expression carefully neutral. They'd valued my client contracts at almost nothing. The intellectual property, the real heart of Secure Flow, was listed as minimal value pending independent assessment. You'll notice we're being generous with the timeline, Dad added. 60 days to transition everything. That's 2 months of continued salary for you while Miranda's team takes over operations. My team is excellent, Miranda bragged. I've already been consulting with some people. We'll modernize everything, probably cut your operational costs by 40% just by eliminating redundancies. The redundancies she was referring to were likely the multiple security layers, the constant system audits, the encryption protocols that went far beyond industry standard. She'd gut the company's actual value in the name of efficiency, never knowing what she was destroying. Sarah, honey, you're being so quiet, Mom leaned forward. What are you thinking? I looked up from the papers. I'm thinking about what happens next. What happens next is you sign, we all hug, and we finally stop worrying about you, Miranda said brightly. Then you can come work in a real office with real support. Maybe you'll even learn something about how successful businesses actually operate. The condescension was so thick I could practically taste it. 3 years of being patted on the head, dismissed, treated like a child playing business while the adults did real work. There's a signing bonus, Dad pointed to a line in the contract. An additional $25,000 once the transfer is complete. That should help you get settled, maybe take a vacation before starting your consulting role. $225,000 total for a company I'd built from nothing. For technology they couldn't begin to understand. For systems that were currently processing. I stopped that thought. They didn't need to know. Not yet. The lawyers are standing by. Miranda checked her phone. We can have this executed within the hour. Clean, simple, done. Why the rush? I asked, my voice still calm. Rush. Miranda's eyes narrowed slightly. Sarah, this has been coming for 3 years. If anything, we've been too patient. Dad's been covering your rent. Mom's been making excuses to her friends about why her daughter's business never seems to grow. I've been watching you struggle when you could have just joined us from the beginning. You were always so stubborn, Mom sighed. Even as a little girl. Remember when you insisted on taking apart the computer instead of just using it like a normal person? That's exactly the problem, Dad added. You're so focused on how things work that you miss the bigger picture. Business isn't about understanding every tiny detail. It's about results, growth, profit. I placed my hands flat on the table, looking at the contract one more time. The terms were insulting. The valuation was absurd. The non-compete would effectively end my career in the field I'd spent a decade mastering. If I don't sign? I asked quietly. The temperature in the room seemed to drop. Then you lose everything anyway, Dad said flatly. Rent comes due in 8 days. Without my support, you're done. At least this way you walk away with something. And you preserve some dignity, Mom added. Wouldn't you rather tell people you sold your company than have it collapse in bankruptcy? Miranda leaned back in her chair, triumphant. Come on, sis. Don't make this harder than it needs to be. You gave it your best shot. Sometimes our best just isn't good enough. There's no shame in that. The office door opened and Dad's assistant poked her head in. Mr. Chin? I'm sorry to interrupt, but there are some men here to see. She didn't get to finish. Two men in dark suits walked past her into the conference room, and one woman followed behind them. They had that unmistakable bearing, federal agents. I recognized the look from my countless meetings over the past 2 years. Sarah Chin, the first man asked, though his eyes had already found me. Yes. Kept my voice level. He pulled out credentials. I'm Special Agent Morrison, Treasury Department, Financial Crimes Enforcement Network. This is Agent Rodriguez and Agent Kim. We need to speak with you about secure flow payment systems. The room went absolutely silent. Miranda's face had gone pale. Treasury Department? What is this about? Agent Morrison's expression was stern. Ma'am, we'll need you to step outside. This is official business with Ms. Chin. Now wait just a minute. Dad stood up, his voice taking on that authoritative tone he used when closing deals. This is my office and Sarah is my daughter. If there's some kind of problem... Sir, this doesn't concern you. Agent Rodriguez cut him off sharply. Ms. Chin, we need to discuss the unauthorized access attempts to your systems. We've detected multiple breaches originating from this location. My heart rate didn't change. I'd been expecting this, though perhaps not quite so dramatically timed. Breaches? I asked calmly. Someone has been attempting to access your federal banking systems integration portal. Agent Kim spoke for the first time, her voice crisp. The attempts originated from an IP address registered to this office building. Your security protocols flagged it and automatically reported to our monitoring systems. Miranda's hand had moved to her throat. Federal banking systems? Sarah, what are they talking about? I didn't answer her. Instead, I looked at Agent Morrison. When did the attempts occur? Beginning approximately 48 hours ago. He consulted a tablet. Multiple login attempts using administrative credentials that were clearly harvested from your systems. The perpetrator had internal knowledge of your architecture. Sarah, Dad's voice had lost its authority, replaced by something that might have been fear. What is he talking about? What federal banking systems? Agent Morrison turned to look at my father fully for the first time. Sir, are you not aware of what your daughter's company does? It processes payments for small businesses, Mom stammered. Dry cleaners and such. The three agents exchanged glances. Agent Rodriguez actually smiled, though it wasn't warm. Miss Chin, Agent Morrison addressed me again. Can you explain to your family the nature of Secure Flow's actual operations? I took a slow breath. Secure Flow Payment Systems is the primary payment processing infrastructure for the Federal Reserve's real-time payment system. We handle the encryption, routing, and security protocols for approximately 40% of all federal banking transactions in the United States. The silence that followed was absolute. Miranda's mouth had fallen open. Dad had actually stepped backward. Mom looked like she might faint. That's... Miranda's voice was barely a whisper. That's not possible. We also provide security infrastructure for the Treasury Department's electronic federal tax payment system, I continued calmly. And we're the primary contractor for the Federal Deposit Insurance Corporation's transaction monitoring systems. Agent Kim nodded. Secure Flow processes approximately $400 billion in federal transactions daily. The security breach attempts we detected were extremely serious. If successful, they could have compromised the entire federal banking infrastructure. $400 billion, Dad repeated as if the words made no sense. Daily. The dry cleaners are a cover, I explained, finally looking at my family. The public-facing clients are real, but they're less than 1% of our actual revenue. Everything else is classified federal contracts. We've been the primary contractor for FinCEN for 18 months. FinCEN, Agent Morrison added helpfully, is the Financial Crimes Enforcement Network. We handle anti-money laundering investigations, counter-terrorism financing, and financial intelligence. Secure Flow's systems are integral to our operations. Miranda's hands were shaking. But, the office. It's so small. You said you were barely covering costs. The real operations aren't conducted from that office, I said. That's just the public face. Our actual data centers are in secure facilities across 3 states. The operational costs I was barely covering? Those were just the expenses for maintaining the public persona. The late rent payments, Dad's voice was hollow. You said. I was diverting funds to expand our federal contracts, I confirmed. The rent was always paid, just not on the schedule you expected. Because frankly, compared to our actual operating budget, that office rent was trivial. Agent Rodriguez pulled out his own tablet. The breach attempts were sophisticated. Someone with inside knowledge of your system's architecture tried to access federal transaction records. We need to know who had access to your credentials. I pulled my laptop from my bag, the one I'd brought for the meeting, though not for the reasons my family had assumed. A few keystrokes brought up the security logs. The attempts came from this IP address. I showed the screen to the agents. It's registered to Chin Development Corporation, my family's real estate company. All 3 agents turned to look at Miranda. Her face had gone from pale to gray. I was just trying to see. Sarah said she couldn't share client information, but I thought if I could just look at the systems I could understand. You attempted to hack into federal banking systems. Agent Kim's voice was ice. Do you have any idea what you've done? I hired someone. Miranda's voice rose in panic. A cybersecurity consultant. I just wanted to see what Sarah was hiding. I thought if I could prove the company was worthless, she'd sell it to me without a fight. I didn't know it was. I thought it was just payment processing for small businesses. Agent Morrison's expression had hardened. You hired someone to breach a federal contractor's security systems. That's a federal crime, Ms. Chin. Multiple federal crimes, Agent Rodriguez corrected. Computer fraud, attempted theft of government property, conspiracy to commit wire fraud. Dad. Miranda turned to our father, desperate. Dad, fix this. You know people you can... Someone you hired, I interrupted calmly. Was it David Brennan? Goes by Data Ghost on certain forums. Miranda's eyes widened. How did you? Because he's an FBI informant, Agent Kim said flatly. He's been working with us for 6 months. The moment you approached him about hacking a federal contractor, he reported it. We've been monitoring this entire operation. The room seemed to tilt. Dad grabbed the back of a chair for support. Your consultant, I explained to Miranda, immediately contacted the authorities. Then he fed you just enough information to think you were succeeding, while every single action was documented and reported. The FBI has recordings of every conversation you had with him. This is insane, Mom's voice was shrill. Sarah, tell them this is a misunderstanding. Tell them Miranda didn't mean. I can't tell them anything except the truth, I said quietly. Miranda attempted to compromise federal banking infrastructure. The Treasury Department doesn't care about family dynamics. Agent Morrison pulled out handcuffs. Miranda Chin, you're under arrest for conspiracy to commit computer fraud and attempted unauthorized access to federal systems. No. Dad moved forward, but Agent Rodriguez blocked him. Sir, step back. Don't make this worse. Miranda was crying now, mascara running down her face. Sarah, please. Tell them I didn't know. Tell them it was a mistake. We're sisters. I watched as Agent Morrison read her rights. The same sister who'd spent 3 years mocking my failed business. Who'd convinced our parents I was incompetent. Who'd tried to steal my company for $200,000. The investigation will extend to anyone who assisted or had knowledge of the breach attempt, Agent Kim said, looking at Dad. Mr. Chin, were you aware of your daughter Miranda's activities? No. She said she was doing research. Due diligence before the acquisition. I didn't know she was. Did you provide funding for this research? Agent Rodriguez asked. Dad's silence was answer enough. We'll need to examine Chin Development Corporation's financial records, Agent Morrison said as he cuffed Miranda. And Mr. Chin, you should contact an attorney. You may be facing charges as an accessory. Mom had started crying too, but it was the quiet, shocked kind of crying. The kind that happened when your entire worldview shattered in under 10 minutes. Sarah, she whispered. Why didn't you tell us? I tried, I said simply. 3 years ago when I started the company, I explained that I was building federal-grade security infrastructure. You said it sounded boring. You asked when I was going to do something important. Agent Kim began escorting Miranda toward the door. My sister was still crying, still calling my name, still begging me to fix this. The federal banking systems Miranda attempted to access, Agent Morrison said, packing up his tablet, process transactions that impact every American citizen. If she had succeeded, or if the breach had been carried out by actual hostile actors using the access she was trying to create, the economic damage would have been catastrophic. I understand, I said. We'll need you to come to our office for a full debrief, he continued. And we'll need to discuss additional security measures for your systems. Of course. I'm scheduled for a review meeting next week anyway. We can combine them. He nodded. We'll be in touch about timing. He paused at the door, looking back at my parents. Your daughter is one of the most valuable security contractors in the federal government. The work she does protects the financial infrastructure of the entire country. You should be proud. Then they were gone, taking Miranda with them. The conference room felt cavernous now. Just me, Mom, and Dad, and the paperwork for a buyout that had become completely meaningless. Dad sank into a chair. $400 billion. Daily. On average, I confirmed. It fluctuates based on market activity. The federal contract revenue alone must be. He couldn't even finish the sentence. Last year's revenue was $1.2 billion, I said quietly. Profit margin of about 40% after expenses. This year we're projected to exceed $1.8 billion. Mom made a small sound somewhere between a gasp and a sob. The company valuation, Dad's voice was mechanical, shocked. If Miranda had succeeded in buying it for $200,000. The actual valuation is somewhere north of $8 billion, I said. Though it's hard to price accurately because of the classified nature of the contracts. Most of our value is in intellectual property and federal relationships that can't be easily transferred. $8 billion, he repeated numbly. I stood up, gathering my things. I need to go. I have a meeting with the Department of Homeland Security in 2 hours about expanding our cryptocurrency monitoring systems. Sarah, wait. Mom reached out, though she didn't actually touch me. We didn't know. You have to understand, we didn't know. You didn't ask, I corrected gently. For 3 years you didn't ask. You saw what you expected to see. A failed business, a disappointing daughter. You never once asked for details about what I was actually building. We thought we were helping, Dad's voice cracked. The buyout, the consulting position. We thought we were saving you from failure. You thought you were acquiring a failed asset for pennies on the dollar, I said. Miranda knew exactly what she was doing. She wanted to steal my company, and she was willing to break federal law to do it. The signing papers were still on the table. I picked them up, looking at the insulting terms one last time. $200,000, I said softly. For a company worth $8 billion. For systems that process nearly half of all federal banking transactions. For infrastructure that protects the financial security of 330 million Americans. I set the papers down and pulled out my phone. A few taps brought up my banking app. I showed Dad the screen, the business account balance. This is just the operating account for the public-facing side of the business, I explained. The account you thought represented my entire company's finances. The balance showed $47 million. Mom actually whimpered. The actual operational accounts are managed through Federal Reserve banking systems, I continued. They're not visible on consumer banking apps. That's where the real money is. Sarah, please. Dad stood up, and for the first time in my life I saw him look genuinely humble. We made a terrible mistake. We can fix this. As a family. Miranda is going to federal prison, I interrupted quietly. The minimum sentence for what she did is 5 years. Probably longer, given the scope and sophistication of the attempt. You'll likely face charges as an accessory if they can prove you funded her consultant. But we're family, Mom pleaded. Surely you can talk to them, explain that we didn't understand. I can't interfere with a federal investigation, I said. And I won't. Miranda didn't just try to steal from me. She tried to compromise systems that protect the entire U.S. banking infrastructure. That's not a family matter. That's a national security issue. Dad's shoulders sagged. What happens now? Now. I picked up my bag. Now I go to my meeting with DHS. You call attorneys, very expensive ones. And you start preparing for what comes next. Which is, he asked. Federal investigation into Chin Development Corporation. Forensic accounting to determine what you knew and when. Possible charges. Definitely publicity. I headed toward the door then paused. Oh, and you should probably prepare for the lawsuits. Lawsuits? I'm a federal contractor with security clearance. Miranda's attempt to breach my systems likely violated the terms of my government contracts. I'll need to sue Chin Development Corporation to demonstrate that I'm taking appropriate action to protect federal interests. It's standard protocol. Mom's face went white. You're going to sue us? I'm going to sue Dad's company, yes. For enabling an attempted breach of federal security systems. My attorneys estimate the damages at around $500 million, though we'll probably settle for much less. 500, Dad couldn't even finish. It's not personal, I said calmly. It's procedure. When a family member of a federal contractor attempts to compromise classified systems, the contractor has to demonstrate absolute commitment to security. That means cutting all ties and pursuing maximum damages. I opened the door then looked back one last time. For what it's worth, I said softly, I really did want you to be proud of me. I wanted to build something important, something that mattered. I wanted to show you that I could succeed on my own terms in my own field. We would have been proud, Mom sobbed. If we'd known. If you'd known I was successful, you'd have been proud, I corrected. But you were perfectly happy to be disappointed when you thought I was failing. That tells me everything I need to know. Dad's voice was barely a whisper. Can you ever forgive us? I considered the question honestly. Maybe eventually. But first, Miranda needs to face the consequences of her actions. You need to understand the magnitude of what almost happened. And I need to focus on my actual work. The work you thought was worthless. The gala, Mom said suddenly, desperately. Next weekend. You could come, explain to everyone what really happened. Show them how successful you are. I won't be at the gala, I said. I'll be in Washington briefing members of the Senate Banking Committee on cryptocurrency regulation. But I'm sure you'll have plenty to talk about with the Hendersons. I stepped into the hallway, leaving them in the conference room with the worthless buyout papers and the shattered remains of their assumptions. My phone buzzed. A text from Agent Morrison. Your sister is being processed. We'll need your statement by tomorrow. Also, the director wants to thank you personally for your cooperation with the monitoring operation. I'd known for 3 weeks that Miranda was trying to hack my systems. The FBI had contacted me immediately when Brennan reported her approach. We'd turned it into a sting operation, documenting every step while she thought she was getting closer to her goal. Another text came through, this one from my actual office. The secure facility where my real team worked. Meeting with DHS confirmed for 2 p.m. The cryptocurrency monitoring expansion looks good for approval. Also, congratulations on whatever just happened. The Treasury Department press release is already making waves. I smiled slightly. The press release would explain that a major security breach attempt had been thwarted, that a federal contractor's sister had been arrested, that the systems protecting America's banking infrastructure had held firm. By tomorrow, every news outlet in the country would know that the federal government's banking security was protected by a small company called SecureFlow. My phone would ring constantly with interview requests, contract offers, and probably a few marriage proposals from people who'd never heard of me 24 hours earlier. And somewhere in a federal holding cell, Miranda would be realizing that the failing business she tried to steal was actually one of the most critical pieces of America's financial infrastructure. The elevator doors opened. I stepped inside, leaving behind the family that had spent 3 years telling me I wasn't good enough, smart enough, successful enough. They'd finally learned the truth. It just came 20 minutes too late and cost them everything. As the elevator descended, I pulled up my schedule for the week. Senate briefing. New contract negotiations with the Department of Defense. A keynote speech at a cybersecurity conference. And somewhere in there, I'd need to meet with my attorneys about the lawsuit against Dad's company. It was going to be a busy week. But then again, running a company that processed $400 billion in federal transactions daily was never boring. The elevator reached the ground floor. I stepped out into the lobby where my security detail was waiting. 2 former Secret Service agents who'd been assigned to me after my security clearance had been elevated 6 months ago. Miss Chin, the lead agent, nodded. The car is ready. We should leave now to make your DHS meeting. Thank you, Marcus. As we walked toward the armored sedan, I caught sight of my reflection in the lobby's glass walls. The same woman who'd been sitting in that conference room 20 minutes ago, being told her business was worthless and her life was disappointing. Except now everyone knew the truth. Sometimes the best revenge isn't getting angry. Staying quiet, building something extraordinary, and letting the world discover your success at exactly the right moment. Or in this case, letting the Treasury Department make the announcement for you. The car door closed behind me and we pulled away from the building. Through the tinted windows, I could see Dad's office on the 15th floor, where he and Mom were probably still sitting in shocked silence, trying to comprehend how completely they'd misunderstood their own daughter. My phone rang. Unknown number, but the caller ID showed a Washington, D.C. area code with a government prefix. Sarah Chin, I answered. Miss Chin, this is Senator Walsh's office. The senator would like to discuss your testimony before the banking committee next week. She's particularly interested in your insights on cryptocurrency regulation and federal payment infrastructure. Of course. I'm available Thursday afternoon. Excellent. We'll send over the details. And Miss Chin? The senator wanted me to tell you that your work protecting our financial systems hasn't gone unnoticed. She's planning to introduce legislation to expand federal funding for cybersecurity contractors like yourself. I appreciate that. Thank you. The call ended. Outside the window, the city scrolled past. Thousands of businesses, millions of transactions, all protected by systems that my family thought were worthless. Another notification popped up on my phone. A news alert. Federal contractor's sister arrested in banking security breach attempt. Inside the secret company protecting America's money. The story was already viral. By tomorrow everyone would know. The investors who'd ignored my pitch meetings. The contractors who'd assumed I was too young or too female to handle serious security work. The family friends who'd smiled sympathetically when they asked about my little business. They'd all know. But more importantly, Miranda would know. Sitting in federal custody, facing 5 to 10 years in prison, she'd have plenty of time to think about the company she'd tried to steal for $200,000. The company worth $8 billion. The company that protected the financial security of an entire nation. The company her failing little sister had built from nothing while everyone around her assumed she was destined for failure. The car merged onto the highway heading toward the airport. The DHS meeting was in Washington, which meant flying on the government jet they'd assigned for my use. Another perk of being a critical federal contractor. I leaned back in the leather seat and allowed myself a small smile. 3 years of being dismissed, belittled, and patronized. 3 years of watching Miranda take credit for mediocre accomplishments while my actually revolutionary work was ignored. 3 years of being the family disappointment. And now in one afternoon, everything had changed. Not because I'd gotten angry or defensive. Not because I'd bragged or shown off. But because I'd stayed quiet, built something extraordinary, and let the truth reveal itself at exactly the right moment. Sometimes that's all it takes. The quiet ones aren't always failing. Sometimes they're just building empires no one else can see yet. And when the Treasury Department comes knocking, everyone finally learns the truth.